Welcome to Start Lines and Swag Bags, presented by the Flying Pig Project. The airing of this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended to replace advice from any medical, professional, or training staff. The Flying Pig Project is not affiliated with or in partnership with any other business, running clubs, coaches, or medical professionals. Thank you for listening and your support.
All right, welcome to this episode of Start Lines and Swag Bags. And you know who I got today? I have the most listened to, most watched guest in Start Lines and Swag Bags history. I have Justin, the physical therapist, back. Justin, hello.
Thank you for having me back on.
So we're going to start. I want to jump right into what we're going to talk about. We'll just do some pleasantries. Justin, you had a race today. What did you race?
I ran the Chicago 13.1. It's a half marathon on the west side of the Chicago neighborhoods. It was my third time running this race, which it was the first time it was under 85 degrees, so that was quite pleasant. But I got a new PR in the half marathon distance.
Nice. Yeah, for anybody around the Chicagoland area, this weekend for outdoor activity was glorious. That's glorious. I don't like it above 70.
I'm kind of the same way now.
Bad things are coming. So we've brought Justin back because clearly, based on his background and, all the knowledge he can bring, we can benefit from a lot of it. A lot of you did reach out to me saying that the conversation that we had about instead of doing 3 sets of 10, you could do 10 sets of 3. Nobody ever looked at it that way before. That's still the one thing that I took away from that episode. But today we're going to talk about not injuries. We're going to talk about pain. Okay. This is the time of year when the 18-week marathon training is starting up. People are busting out new shoes. People are doing distances they've never done before. And let's start talking about, when something comes up, an injury, a pain, what should we do?
So I think the first place to start is kind of addressing specifically when do these pain episodes start. So is it really just with running? And then with that, does it affect more of the day-to-day life? As a physical therapist, I tend to find people where they've been working with the pain or injury, if it gets to that point, for at least a couple days and weeks. Sometimes I do get more like what we call acute. So it's just like, I stubbed my toe like 5 hours ago and I can't walk. What do I do? Sometimes that happens. But basically trying to tease out, when does pain start? How severe is it to the point where am I still able to run with it? Does it change my mechanics? Does it prevent me from going to sleep? And other facets of someone's day-to-day life.
So first of all, thank you for saying about changing the mechanics. Because I was hoping at some point that was going to come up. And of course, there we're talking about if your right knee is bothering you and you're running despite it bothering you and you keep going and you keep going, what you don't necessarily realize is that is actually knocking off your running gait. And if you keep doing that, you very likely could end up with an injury or a strain on the other side for the compensation you've been doing. So let's start with this. So let's define what pain should I absolutely stop in my tracks, or what pain can I ride out?
Yep. So there are about 3 to 4 descriptors I like to give for the pain that's kind of like a non-negotiable. It's a deal breaker. If you experience this type of pain and you want to describe it in that matter, it's not worth trying to overcome the difficulty of a task with that pain. So kind of like a sharp stabbing pain. So a pain that's going to I kind of say like stop in your tracks or like take your breath away. That's one. Two, I say intense throbbing. Because sometimes with like someone's excited, like they feel like their heart racing. That could just be like they're actually excited. But a throbbing that's to the point where like their entire, let's say it's in their knee, and it's like my entire knee is like pulsating to the point where I'm a little bit nervous, just because the ambiguity of that situation. It may not be worth to again continue. A pain that maybe starts in what we call a local area, so just one pinpoint. I have pain in my shoulder when I run, but over the last couple hours, it started going into my neck and down my arm. Yeah, don't run that day, or in that moment. And lastly, numbness or tingling, because that usually infers a nerve issue, which you can work with nerve pain, but if you think about hitting your funny bone, not very comfortable, and it lingers for a bit, but nerves are designed to be quite sensitive, so that's in their nature. But if you do compromise a little bit of nerve condition, and you don't necessarily have a plan, hold off for now.
Two things on that I'm going to address. The big one is ambiguity. And I think that's a great word because, here's the thing. There is no one who can rate a pain scale of how you are feeling but yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have different pain tolerances. Some of us could be sidelined by the stubbing of the toe. Okay.
If I
But
get
other
hit, if I get
people-
hit in the shin, it's a wrap. I'm out for the day.
But that's exactly right. But like, there's no way. Whenever you go, they're like, "Well, can you rate your pain?" Okay, but my rating it as a 4 could be someone else's 8, and there's no way to accurately describe pain to someone else. And I think that's a challenge in itself. However, if I see you wincing, doubled over, crying, rubbing the area over and over and over again, I'm not impressed that you keep going, because I need you to maybe take a step back in that moment, stop, and reevaluate that particular moment. And as you say, what effect is it going to have if you keep going? So next, what I think we need to do, so now you've introduced the 4 types that you would recommend anybody experiencing those 4 things to possibly consider just stopping. Like, just stop. Okay. But then we now have this issue. Maybe we have an issue with the knee. Maybe our shin is hurting every so often. I think it's tricky to come up with the appropriate reaction to an injury. Okay. Because it's very easy to overreact and underreact. Okay. Underreaction, is of course going and doing the thing anyway. What do you say to people, or what are your thoughts on that?
It can be a tricky slope, meaning you can have no injury, no substantial structural damage. However, that pain that is present can start compounding over time, and it's going to infer that, hey, it's been a month or two and I'm still not better. Why aren't I better? And I think the challenges as runners is there are so many variables that you can pick and choose from. But I think the easiest is not the right word. The simplest way to tackle that dilemma is, when did this pain start and what key change occurred? Kind of what you mentioned at the top of the episode. Did I get new shoes? Did I start a new training program? Did I go through a hardship at work? Did I start having, let's say a cold, and you're just coming off of a sickness, and then you kind of resume your running routine as if it were, but now there's pain. So being able to reflect a bit by taking a step back and try to experiment a bit with what actually could be the cause. Because most injuries from the running end are overuse or overdoing. And I think sometimes the simple answer is I felt a little too good, and maybe I ran a little too fast, or I ran a little bit too much. But I also think there's the other avenue of recovery when it comes to running. So you can have a great workout, and no one's going to take that away from you, but you had a crummy night of sleep the day later that day, and you wake up the next day not feeling great. Is it because you trained too hard, or did you not recover well?
One of the things that you stress, and this is something that I talked about with an episode that, as of this recording, has not yet been released. It was with Sabrina, a friend of mine who is a running coach. And one of the things she talks about most with her athletes is some of the things you talk about. All the variables that we don't necessarily think about. You know, you see someone's Strava post or any post, and normally it's, this is how long I ran, these were the shoes I had on, this was my pace. But I've known people that have journals that are as specific as, this is the fuel I took that day. My knee started bothering me at mile 3, so that they can start detecting patterns or themes, which is something I would recommend to anybody. But I do appreciate the fact that, you know, there are other factors that affect us physically, even though we don't necessarily think they do. Bad eating, no hydration, overhydration, lack of sleep, all these things can play into, this is how I look at it. If I go out for a run in the morning and maybe I had a bad night of sleep, I wasn't eating, I can guarantee I'm probably not moving my legs the regular way. They're probably dragging a little. So now my gait's off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my gait's off, my hip is going to hurt. So you really do, you have to be, that's why we talk about having the right reaction. You have to just, I think, stop and look at the whole picture.
Absolutely. And I think to the question of overreacting or underreacting, the only, I don't want to say only, but the main barrier that comes with overreaction is actually more a perception thing. So having pain for so long, for high rating of pain, does not necessarily mean you have to have something quote unquote wrong with you. Like, again, let's say someone let's use the stub the toe example because it's very relatable. If someone's a chronic toe stubber, that's not a condition. That's inconvenience, in my opinion. But, you know, I think we take note. Okay, why do I keep stubbing my toe? Oh, I have a bed that has a leg that's out, or I walk around barefoot at home and I have a pretty small home environment. As silly as that sounds, these are sometimes the level of thinking I have to get to. But obviously in relation to runners, it's like, hey, you get a lot of stress at work, right? Okay, well, I think everyone can experience stress at work. Do you feel that takes over and you want to de-stress by running? And usually with what's the right word for this? So a way to get rid of our stress from work, there's usually an aggressiveness that someone wants to utilize, and that could be running faster. If someone likes to lift weights, lift heavier. They want to do like a HIIT workout, move a lot faster. But it usually equates to more demanding tasks. Now equate high stress mentally with high stress physically. That is going to be a pretty demanding stimulus, and I don't want to make it as an assumption that it's bad. This actually could be okay if you recover well. So your sleep actually might take more precedent, in my opinion, of having that crummy day of work.
Right. So I have to admit, everyone who's listening, Justin and I just went through about a 15-minute technology nightmare because his feed was not working, and he was talking, but his face wasn't moving. And then all of a sudden there was silence, and he was miming everything. So we're going to try to jump in where we left off. I think we were talking about how we need to give some credence to the other factors in our lives and how they affect an injury, how they affect how, we may feel about an injury. For example, let's say you do have I have a little hip issue that acts up every so often. I've had it since I trained for a marathon 7 years ago. And there are some times when I have been running and it will bother me, and I actually, it aggravates me more that it's now bothering me again. And then I turn into the other type of person we're going to talk about, and that's the overreactor. Now, before we talk about overreacting, I'm going to give a couple of examples what I view as overreacting, because I think, again, that's another term that's very subjective. It doesn't look the same to either one of us. If you buy a brand new pair of shoes and the first time you wear them, your calves hurt, that's an overreaction. If you just ran 10 miles for the first time and your longest run before that was 8 miles and your legs hurt and you think something's wrong, that's an overreaction. If you talk to a friend and they recommend a brace or some compression or something that worked for them and you're going to now try it, that is an overreaction. In my opinion, and everybody's free to have their opinion, I believe that when you do get hurt, the very first thing you need to do is stop, as we talked about, and think in the moment. What are your thoughts on the overreaction?
Yeah, I think that's the very human nature of us, right? Like, we want to try to get to the bottom of like the reason why we're in pain. And I think the challenge that comes from my realm is someone's pain actually equating to a structural issue, to an injury condition? And I would say for the most part, there's usually not a really, really severe situation if it's occurring quite recent. So if I started having knee pain, and I ran a race earlier today, and my knee was, let's say, bugging me, I can't necessarily say, like, oh, I think I, tore a tendon in my knee, or I have a stress fracture in my leg. I very well could be working my way towards there, but it's really hard to determine that situation right now. But kind of at the top of the topic, there are a lot of variables that kind of come to why someone experiences pain. And pain doesn't always have to be the indicator that something is completely wrong. Like, you can have a very capable body, but nutrition is off, hydration's off. So finding the reasons that led up to the current experience, it is a lot of guessing in the beginning, but I don't think there's harm in seeking medical advice early on, especially back to that key point earlier, ambiguity. If there's not necessarily a plan that you can depend on that helps you get past this situation, that's going to linger. That's going to carry into other facets of your day. Oh, I only have pain when I'm running, but I run around to work a lot. How do you know that you're walking in a similar way? And the thing with compensations that people don't always highlight, in my opinion, is that it's functional. Why do we compensate? It allows us to get the task done. It doesn't have to necessarily be the bane of someone's existence when it comes to an injury situation.
So while he was talking, my face was probably not being shown, but you said one thing, and of course my little, radar tentacles go off, and that is running and walking involves different muscles. Everybody. Justin, verify that for me, because I know it's true.
It is very, very true.
It is so something can hurt when you're walking and not when you're running, or it can hurt when you're running and not when you're walking. But that doesn't mean that the injury is worse. It doesn't mean it's not as bad. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that it's only happening during this time. Because I would have people that would say to me, "Well, it doesn't hurt when I walk, but it hurts when I run." Okay, two different muscle groups. Something you did send me, and I think is a good time to actually bring up. The word I was looking for was tightness.
Ah, yes.
So let's talk about let's talk. That's I think that is a common word that I think we can all understand when it comes to how we feel. I equate tightness with a muscle cramp, which means you're not hydrated and you don't have electrolytes. But let's talk about tightness.
So there's a lot of ways to get into the word tightness. So at least the most common remedy for tightness is stretching, correct? But the problem I have with that is you're assuming there's no other possible influences on someone's flexibility, someone's feeling of being able. And the key thing with range of motion or flexibility is essentially kind of like a rubber band. When you have a rubber band or a hair tie, let's say, when you create tension in the band, you expect a recoil. However, if that rubber band is too small, you have to pull a lot harder. You have to exert more effort. However, if the band is too long, you don't have to apply that much pressure, but you don't get the snapback that you're looking for. So when it comes to muscles, oh, I don't have enough room, I don't have enough flexibility, let me stretch it out. But what if I told you that's not the end-all be-all solution to that? What I actually tend to find, and there is some research that shows this, most of the tightness that someone experiences, especially if they're someone who engages in exercise and in our case running, it actually may not be an inflexibility issue. It's not because someone's lacking enough length. It actually could be a strength thing or a technique thing. Hydration and electrolytes, stuff like that, those are influences, but you generally would have to find something that occurs when you're much more depleted in running, let's say. So if you're running for maybe roughly an hour, 90 minutes, and that's assuming you started hydrated in the first place. But that feeling is usually assumed to have that same end-all be-all solution. And if you stretch every day for weeks upon end, for months upon end, you're not better, I hate to break it to you, I don't think flexibility is your problem.
Well, because to exactly what you're saying, we don't necessarily talk enough about strength training and running, which is literally an entire other episode.
Stay tuned.
It see, if you take the same I'm going to describe myself here. If you take the same weak little muscle and every day you stretch it out, that's wonderful. But it's not going to solve the problem. You have to develop that muscle.
Yes, and I think especially when it comes to performance, right? Like, it's not like we have all the fancy gear. I have a Garmin. Well, this is a Whoop, but I have the fancy gear that helps me do stuff to engage in exercise. But that doesn't mean I'm a high-level performer in that sport. It's actually more of at least for running, it tends to be how consistent are you? How pain-free can you be? How injury-free can you be? And when you stack enough time and experience with that, you tend to gain a lot more fitness. So maybe you can run faster at easy paces. You can run further over the course of the week. But that's also assuming that the other factors in someone's life are fairly consistent. So if someone has trouble detecting, am I overtraining? Am I not sleeping enough? Is my nutrition accommodating with what I want to do? It does get quite overwhelming.
So, it's interesting that you should, bring that up because, one of the things that Byron and I talked about when he was on his episode was the dramatic improvement that he has gained over a year and a half. And one of the reasons that, or one of the things he credits that with, is his open-mindedness to understand that running in itself is not running. That's not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's strength training. There's yoga. There's recovery runs. There's all these other things that play into keeping you a healthy, improving runner. Running is not, I was going to say running is not a solo sport. But see, here's the thing. You understand what I mean by that. Running in and of itself is not, you can't just do that.
Yeah. When we think of runners, like, as we are on the same team, like we know our high performers in terms of like they can run the fastest. What do? They're not all training exactly the same. They don't live the same exact lives, but that's also not to take away the people who don't run as fast. Like I kind of give credit to people who, have a lot going on personally from what they've been comfortable sharing. And I'm like, wow, that's a undertaking to go, and they still show up. And I think regardless of what journey you walk, end of the day, can you show up to run for yourself, to put in the work that will gain a level of fitness? And sometimes that's one aspect. Then the other end is, do you run just because you like the routine of it? Do you just enjoy being with others or on your own? So yeah, there's a lot of facets that come with running, but that's just because that's the beauty of the sport.
Let's talk about recovery though, because recovery, I think sometimes people don't necessarily understand what recovery means.
That's true. And I think that's actually the biggest take-home point that I give to my patients, just when they have like, an injury or a condition, when they're not able to like sleep well or have a pain-free day at work. It usually is recovery. I think, as people were conditioned to think, if I have a barrier, I'm not doing enough. I'm not exerting energy to gain more ability as often as I should. I do think gets a little bit convoluted at times. But I actually do agree in the sense of like energy should be expended, but maybe to allow your body to rebuild. So when we think about recovery, that's the assumption, right? We're rebuilding the damage that we've done, this productive damage that we've done, in order for us to gain more speed, more strength, more, let's say, mental bandwidth to encourage us to take on more. And, I think usually the biggest emphasis I can give is sleep generally. I'll say from my end, like I had pretty bad sleeping habits when I first started working as a PT, and it got to a point where like I could probably sleep more, and there was just too much chaos that allowed me to actually have consistency in sleep. I would have a great night's sleep. I would stay up late the other day, or another day, let's say playing video games or watching basketball. And then I would want to work out the next day. It's like, oh, wait, I don't feel that great. But long spiel short, being able to optimize sleep is probably the best, simplest, the most straightforward way that you can gain recovery. But there are multiple layers that a healthcare professional can be able to help you, or a coach, especially when it comes to running.
I agree with you that sleep is probably the key. Although I will say it's I don't believe it's the easiest recovery step one could have. But I think sometimes what people forget, let's talk about strength training for a second. When you lift weights, the fibers in your muscles, they tear.
They do.
They break, they tear. And the healing is what is going to make you stronger. The repetitive act of the tearing, the repairing, the tearing, that's how you get physically stronger.
Yes.
Okay.
The training is a stimulus for change. The actual gain comes from recovery.
So, how would you, for a new runner, okay, how would you, besides sleep, define what does recovery look like?
So, especially with a sport like running, we talked about consistency and trying to be as injury free as we can. So, the main physiological emphasis I give is actually circulation. When we think about what our body needs, it's usually, these like molecules. So think like glucose. We have lactate in our body that we need to get out. We try to take in oxygen through our hemoglobin. We're trying to get rid of carbon dioxide when we exhale. So all of these consistent factors that come through our bloodstream is our body's way of being like, get the good stuff in, get the bad stuff out. So when it comes to recovery, how do we facilitate increased circulation? And as we know from school, everyone who has gone to school, going to PE class, going for a walk, not being sedentary. And I think once I was able to hammer that home into my thick skull, I felt my running evolved, but also my quality of life. So Rachel mentioned using Strava as a resource in terms of like looking at pace. So I'll say anecdotally, recovery and easy paces should help encourage a degree of circulation. Recovery has additional layer of being super easy, in my opinion. Like you should not feel super taxed, but your goal should be increasing circulation. Does that mean you have to run? No. Sometimes if I'm too physically beat up, because there's the cardiovascular realm and the muscular realm that comes with running, sometimes my legs are just too tired. I'll go on my, stationary bike here. I'll go for a walk. I'll ride my bike outside. Luckily, as a PT, I can even just walk around work just because that's my privilege that I have with that job. So being able to increase circulation as much as I can, but also accounting for don't tax my muscles. They just got beat up from the track workout the other day. I should try to take it easy from that end, but do as much of the circulatory gains that I can get so your muscles get all the good stuff, get all the bad stuff out.
It's interesting because, when we talk about recovery, it doesn't matter what type of recovery we're talking about. The recommendation for recovery is never sit on your butt and don't do anything.
That's usually how you get worse, sadly.
That's exactly right. There, obviously not 100% of the time, but the majority of the time, it's get up, get your muscles moving, get everything flowing, go outside, take a 10, 15-minute walk. I try to do that as often as I can. But even like if I feel myself getting stressed at work, I will walk the building 8 or 9 times to just really just get everything, not necessarily flushing it out, but getting it moving. Because getting whatever it is moving just helps clear your mind. That deep breaths, some purposeful movement in the moment, that can lower your stress level.
Yeah. And, I think especially with stress being something that will unfortunately burn the match so quickly, the more that you can retain as much of your overall capacity from a day-to-day end, that will pay dividends in the long term, especially when we think of we can't necessarily avoid stress altogether, but we can withstand it a bit better through certain strategies and certain lifestyle changes. Easier said than done, and it does take a bit of trial and error, but there is a hill to be overcome when we keep trying.
The ability to stop and evaluate the whole circumstance, the whole scenario. Justin, like you were talking about, the stress, the shoes, the different track. a different race. All the factors. And you can stop and look at that objectively. That's a mature runner. Okay. Sometimes it's not your day. And something's going to hurt.
And that doesn't necessarily mean you tore something, you broke something. You don't have to have a systemic issue just to have one bad day of running. Obviously, if there's trends that show that, you want to try to figure out a plan to address that. But I think the last take-home point that I have with this topic is, when should I go see a doctor? I'm like, are you? Sometimes I want to say, like, are you freaking out yet? And not just to, call someone out on it, but it's like, hey, if you're really unsure, you need to get the information now, but don't assume you have something that structurally wrong with you, or something that's like really substantially affecting your ability. It could just be a string of bad days. So, if someone really wants an answer ASAP, go for it. But go in with a clear mind, be open to a lot of options, and be willing to learn different avenues to address the same goal, which is go back to running pain-free in this case.
And be prepared that you just may not leave with an answer that day, because that can bother people. When we're talking about anything that, is soft tissue, you don't have an answer right away. Sometimes you kind of got to wait and see. So, if something does start up, take this recommendation, start writing it down and keep track of it. When is it happening? Why is it happening? Is it always happening on a Saturday morning run because you stayed out until 2:00 in the morning on Friday?
Not me.
Then you have other issues. But no, write this stuff down, because even if nothing else, the more you write down, when you do seek help, if that's the road you take, oh my goodness, Justin, how would you feel about a patient who comes in and they're like, here's my 3 weeks of documentation of when it happened and what the circumstances were?
Oh my gosh, like that makes, in my opinion, my life so much easier, because most of the time when I first meet someone is being able to ask the right questions. And that's because of me trying to create the most clear picture that I can, but that only can be done if my patient engages to that level of detail that I hope to get. And if there's a lot of recall in I would call it a high stress moment of like, hey, can you tell me everything that has occurred to why you have pain? That is a lot. And then that's not accounting for the emotional response that someone gets from finally coming to see me. So the more information that I can get, and there is no such thing, in my opinion, as useless or dumb information, I have to decipher that as a healthcare professional. Sometimes I have these details that day 1 don't affect me, but day 28 it does.
And I like that comment too, because the reason I favor the writing it down, memory issues, recall issues, but also, sometimes you don't necessarily want to share all the information. It's especially when you're meeting a doctor for the first time, it's how much do you want to share? How honest are you going to be with yourself when you answer the questions? Because if you feel, embarrassed or like you're being judged, and so you're not actually going to admit to things, that's going to obviously impact the care.
Absolutely.
All right. So, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode. This episode was riddled with technical issues. And Justin, you are such a good sport at these technical issues today.
Even I was the cause of them in the beginning. Actually, not even beginning. Not just the beginning. Beginning, middle. Hopefully, not in the last half an hour.
He was the cause of it all.
You can call me out on it. That's totally fine. And I feel so bad.
The good news is that we were able to touch on issues that I think can relate to literally everybody. And it really, the way we were able to talk about it, it doesn't just restrict it to a running sport. If you're a cyclist, the same things apply. You know what? If you're a walker, walk, my friend, walk every single day. But the same applies to you too, if something starts to hurt. With that being said, Justin, thank you for
My
our
pleasure.
second PT episode.
Actually, can I say
Yeah.
one thing real quick?
Of course.
So basically everything I said, these are not rules set in stone. End of the day, in my role, it's a educated guess or suggestion. So I could say things that I sound like I'm standing by firmly, but I also have to be able to look back, realize that I maybe said an inaccurate suggestion, but find the means to get there. Obviously, I try to minimize that as much as I can, but I'm human too. But being able to take things as like a daily experiment, write them down, as Rachel said, and when we have evidence of the things that would positively influence us and negatively influence us, I think there's a way to get there, especially when most injuries don't come from freak accidents.
I 100% appreciate you adding that. One of the very important things that I did when I launched this podcast was issue that disclaimer, because, especially when we're talking about, obviously you are fully certified, in your position, but at the same time, we're talking about an area that is so gray. It's the grayest of areas. So, everybody just listen, listen to what you hear, and, absolutely seek medical advice if you need to.
Yeah, and I guess like for all my teammates, I try to do the best I can, but hang in there.
That's true. You know what? Have patience. That's the best thing. And, truly, as a way to wrap up the episode, even, all we've been talking about this whole time when it comes to recovery and injury and all of that, it's patience.
It really is. Our timelines are not set in stone as much as any medical professional will try to tell you, including myself. Everyone is one of one, and we don't always fit the mold. And that's not to say that we're too far gone to get to a certain place. It is just a little bit more patience, but also some trial and error and finding the trends that help us.
And all we're trying to do, folks, is help you mature a little faster as a runner.
There you
All
go.
right, with that, thank you so much for supporting Start Lines and Swag Bags. Thank you for making Justin's first episode the most listened and watched. I can't wait to see what happens with this one.
If they see the errors, get this dude out of here.
and we will, and we will have to. We are clearly we've already got the next episode's subjects going. So with that, I bid you all a thank you for listening, since I don't know when you're going to listen to this. And my endings are always really weird. Justin, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you again, and hope everyone has a lovely rest of their day.
All right, we're going to see if the reactions are going to work.
Oh, I got to go to my go-to hand positions.
Wait, what's the heart thing? The Filipino heart.
The Filipino heart? Oh, I wouldn't call it Filipino, but this one. I remember how you said like you always put this thing on your post. I'm like, oh yeah, like it's a heart. Yes. It's a heart. So it's like.
Oh. You know what I thought it was? This is how we're going to end the episode. You know what I thought this was? The world's smallest violin, and it's playing your song.
Oh my god. I what it is to somebody.
Bye, everybody.
See you later.